kid, I had an unhealthy obsession with trying to find ways to lie to my brother without him realizing I was lying to him. So I was the older brother, I had a younger brother, and for some reason I just loved to trick him, get him to do things he shouldn't do, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things in my house that was true is like, if you say the words, "I promise," you had better be telling the truth. And so he would always ask, if we would get into a conversation, "Do you promise?" And I was like, he's got me. It's like checkmate. I can't lie anymore. So then I devised a plan in which it would appear that I was promising, even though I really wasn't. And I would add a K on the end of the word promise. And it was really subtle. So he'd say, "Do you promise?" And I'd say, "I promise." Just that little K. And then it's like, well, what's a promise? It's not even a word. Yeah, I didn't promise. I promise. That's not even a thing. So I can lie if I promise. So sometimes he'd say, "Do you promise?" And I'd say, "I promise." And he'd get like an inch from my mouth with his ear, like, "I'm listening for your little K that you're throwing in there." It's the equivalent of like, "Oh, I had my fingers crossed. I don't have to tell the truth if I have my fingers crossed." So kids, we do that kind of stuff all the time. And it's not just kids, though. People of all walks of life, including, and certainly not limited to, politicians. Do politicians ever lie or say things that aren't true? So I'm going to offend both groups of people that are here today. I'm going to offend some Republicans and some Democrats, because sometimes your leaders don't tell the truth. So let's start with George H.W. Bush at the 1988 Republican Convention. I bet you could finish this quote. He said, "Read my lips. No new." Oh, man, he made a promise, didn't he? And what happened in his term? They raised taxes. And that, combined with an independent, Ross Perot, jumping in, that lost him the 1992 election. His predecessor, Bill Clinton, famously said, while being questioned under oath, "Well, it depends on what your definition of the word is." Now, I was alive when those happened, but those were 30 plus years ago, and I remember like reading about it and seeing it well after the fact. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're the leader of the free world, and you're trying to convince us that you don't know the definition of the word "is"? When you used it in the very sentence that you questioned the meaning of it? How does that make sense? It's because people are always trying to find ways to get around or circumvent telling the truth. People are looking for loopholes. They're always trying to get out of things. This is why when you go to buy a house or refinance a house, they have to cut down 37,000 trees to come up with the amount of paperwork that you have to sign and initial, because over the years, people have found loopholes, I assume, to get out of paying for their house, and so then they've got to cover all of their bases. So you're signing initially. You may be more disciplined than me. I got to the point to where it's like, I'm just signing things. They could have said anything. Okay, in the event of a zombie apocalypse, you promise to pay back your house. Initial here. Okay, fine. Zombies come. I'll still make my mortgage payments. It's gotten to the place to where when I bought the house that I live in now, wasn't on the market. My father-in-law heard that the guy maybe want to sell, so he called him. We went and we looked at it. We talked about price, and then we shook hands. Like, that was how it happened. And 2 days later, he called me. He's like, "Hey, I just want to make sure, like, is this going to happen? Is this for real? Because I'm going to start, like, boxing up my stuff, but I want to make sure you guys are in." And I said, "I've got my mortgage lender. I've already been pre-approved. We're good to go on our end. Do you want earnest money? Do you want me to sign something?" And he said, No. We shook hands. That's good enough for me. And if I can't trust a preacher, who can I trust? And I thought, sometimes that isn't a good policy, because sometimes preachers, like the Baptists, for instance, I'm not calling anybody out, but sometimes even pastors, preachers, ministers get themselves in trouble. But he was good with we shook hands, and that was it. So in our lives, here's what we know to be true. People look for loopholes to get out of telling the truth, number one. And then in certain situations, they become more likely to tell the truth. You swear on a Bible, you're talking to a police officer or a lawyer or whatever. You're like, uh-oh, I'm going to get in trouble if I lie. I need to tell the truth. And here's what Jesus is going to tell us today. How about you just tell the truth? All times, all circumstances, all situations. If it's important, if it's not, just be a person who says what they mean and means what they say. So we're continuing our message series in the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 through 37. And Jesus is addressing a very specific topic of his day. And there's a lot of things that he says that, like cultural nuances, that when you kind of look at the history and the background really become clear. But man, it has so much application for us today. So here's what he says, beginning in verse 33. Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. So you can look back at Leviticus and Deuteronomy, that there were different oaths that you could make that were legally binding. So like Israel, it wasn't just a religious structure, it was a civil structure as well. So there were different promises, or I swear on this, or I swear on that. Some were more legally binding in the minds of the Israelites. But here's what Jesus says. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for that's God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. So in Jesus' time period, people would make different degrees of promises or swear by different things, and the higher thing that you swore by, the more likely you were to be telling the truth. A Christmas story taught us that there were different degrees of dares. I dare you, I double dare you, all the way to I triple dog dare you. In Jesus' day, there was that equivalent of oaths. And so you would swear by some facet of heaven, or by the temple, or by the gifts that were altered, and the gold on the, like all this different stuff. And depending on what you said, determined how likely you were to be telling the truth. Now the Pharisees and the religious leaders, they found their own little loopholes in all of this. So you can look at what Jesus says in Matthew 23, for instance. The passage is called the 7 woes, where Jesus just yells at the Pharisees over 7 areas in which they're getting wrong. One of them is when they make an oath. Because there are certain oaths that they make that they are going to keep, and there are some that they make that trick people into believing them that they have no intention on keeping. It's basically like crossing your finger. Hey, yeah, I promised, or I promised, but I had my fingers crossed so I don't have to do what I said. This is the idea that Jesus is frustrated at here. So you're swearing by different things. And so you may swear by the earth. You understand the earth is God's. You understand that Jerusalem is God's, that heaven is God's, and everything else belongs to him and not you. So you're swearing by these different things, thinking there are degrees. It all belongs to God. Don't think that certain promises hold more weight than others. Well, I don't have to tell the truth here because I only swore by this step leading up to the temple as opposed to the entire temple. Jesus is like, what is wrong with you people? He goes on to say, and don't swear by your head, for you can't make even one hair white or black. Now some of you, you're like, bet, watch me. And you do different dyes and different things. But in their culture, your hair was going to change colors, it was going to fall out, it was going to be what it was, and you had no control over any of it. And Jesus is trying to point out, you're not the one who has control. Elsewhere in the Sermon on the Mount, he's like, God has every single hair on your head numbered. He knows everything about you. God is ultimately in control of all things. So at the end of the day, all you need to say is yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. So whenever you stand before a judge and you have to swear on a Bible, some people have taken this to say, I can't swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. I'm just going to let my yes be yes and my no be no. That is not exactly what Jesus is talking about here. If you go to Chicago for the weekend and you see a crime, which if you're there for the whole weekend, you probably will, okay? And you're brought before a judge, and they say, you need to swear on this Bible to tell the whole truth, nothing but you. And you're like, hey, Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 through 38, I'm not comfortable doing that. That's not what Jesus is addressing here. The two things he's trying to get in our heads is, number one, always tell the truth, no matter if you promise or swear by something or you sign a document or whatever. If the words come out of your mouth, it's what you mean. That you're just going to be the type of person that any time you speak, regardless of the degree or the circumstances, that you're just going to be a person who just always tells the truth. That's number one. Number two, Jesus wants you to live the type of life that when you say something, people just believe you. Because you're a person who tells the truth. So when I was 7, 8 years old, my brother would say, do you promise? Why would he say that to me? Because I lied to him all the time. That's what brothers do. So live the type of life where someone isn't going to say, do you promise? Are you telling the truth? Do you swear by something? Like when you're a kid, it's like, I swear by, and people will swear by different things. You would even do that as a kid. Just be the type of person when you say it, they're like, hey, this dude doesn't lie. He's telling the truth. So always tell the truth regardless of the circumstances surrounding. And be that type of person that people just believe you when you speak. Now, there are some things that we do that get us in trouble. In terms of like, okay, this is a discipline. We're going to do our best to tell the truth in all circumstances, all situations. And then there's like a lifestyle practice or different things that we kind of just inadvertently think or do that gets us into trouble and makes us say things that we really don't mean. And when you look throughout the rest of the Bible, there are different tips, if you will, that we can glean from the principles that are put both in the Old and New Testament. And what I want to do is take the backdrop of this and then say, okay, make sure that you avoid these three things, or make sure that you are mindful of these three things. Okay? So here's the first thing I want you to be mindful of. Number one, don't speak rashly. Don't be quick to speak or say things. So in James, I remember memorizing this as a kid. It was probably Rainey Tammy Knox who taught us this, because I remember actions with the verse. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And like the idea of like bringing the temperature down in your heart. Like just be slow, quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Some people are really quick to speak. And you know that if you're trying to buy something or make a deal, the person who speaks first after offers are made is usually the one that loses. Quick to speak gets you into trouble more often than you think. The Apostle Peter, he is a guy who is quick to speak. And he was quick to speak in different places. Matthew chapter 16, he pulls Jesus aside. No, you're not going to be crucified. Jesus is like, get behind me, Satan. Yes, this is what I'm supposed to do. And I just can't imagine what Peter's expression or reaction was to being called Satan. And whenever, during the Last Supper, when like, hey, you all are going to fall away. And Peter's like, even if I have to die, I will not disown you. I promise, Jesus. He didn't add a K on the end either. He's like, I'll never do that to you. And then you don't have to read too much further to realize that he denied Jesus 3 times. Sometimes you're quick to speak, or you speak rashly for different reasons, like you don't necessarily think through what you're saying and what you're agreeing to. Sometimes, like people are, you're a people pleaser. You want people to like you. You have a hard time saying no. Some of you just need to say no to things. You're too busy. You've got too many obligations. You're trying to take care of too much. And it's like, hey, can I add this responsibility on your plate to kind of free me up from some things? And you're like, sure, yeah, no problem. When in fact, you don't have the time or energy to even deal with what you've got to do. I find myself, and this is just, you'll just see a little bit into my heart here. And it's not always good to see that. I say every year I'm not going to coach my kids' teams. So when they sign up for Little League or they do rec soccer, it's like, I'm just going to let somebody else coach. I just want to be a fan. And then I get a phone call and somebody's like, hey, we need coaches. Doug, will you please coach? And you know what I say every single time I get a phone call? Hey, Doug, can you do this? Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it. Why? Because nobody else is stepping up. And I know what it's like to need volunteers in different areas and people not being willing to step up. And so it's like, okay, I'm coaching both my kids' basketball teams or both my kids' soccer teams. I don't even know anything about soccer. Doug, can you coach the soccer? I don't know anything about soccer. Nothing. I know that it's like they kick the ball instead of like dribble it and pass it. Other than that, I'm kind of clueless. But when they're like the size of your waist, it's crowd management at that point. It's not like we need to come up with intricate plays. And so it's like, yes, I will agree to coach soccer. I say yes, not necessarily because I want to, but because nobody else will do it. Now, so far, I've not gotten myself into too much trouble there. Yes, it's extra time. Yes, it's extra energy. But looking back, I don't regret being willing to say yes in those capacities. But if you're not careful, you'll just say yes, yes, yes. And some of you, you just need to say, you know what, let me check on that. Hey, let me think about that. Now, that person didn't want to hear that because they're just wanting a hard yes so they can put you in that spot or have you do that thing and move on. But some just be slow to commit to things if you're the type of person who just inadvertently or accidentally just quickly always gets to yes. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 verse 2 says, do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven and you on earth, so let your words be few. The more that you talk, the more likely you are to say something that you regret saying. So don't speak rashly or quickly or a lot of words for that matter. Number 2, weigh your words carefully. Be mindful of what you say. Your words matter. Avoid saying things like always, never, absolutely. No problem. I'll take care of that. Dad, can we get a dog? I don't know about getting a dog. I have enough chores I got to deal with here. No, Dad, listen, I'll feed it. I'll take it outside at 4:30 if it needs to go outside. If it makes a mess in the house, I promise I'll clean it up. So you're saying I never have to do it and you will always do it? I don't believe you as far as I can throw you. Because what they just want, they like the idea of a puppy. And if they said, Dad, I really want a puppy, and 8% of the time, roughly, I'm going to take it outside and clean up for it and, feed it. And just, can I do 10% and you do 90%? Like, could we do that? At least I would say, you know what? You've really thought about this. You've weighed your words carefully. I'd be more likely to get them a puppy if they said, I'll take care of it for like the first 3 hours and you take care of it the rest of its life. That would at least be a really honest discussion and would prove to me that my little 9-year-old has really thought about this a lot. Instead of just flippantly throwing your words out there. There's a line in which we're supposed to under-promise and over-deliver. So weigh your words carefully in business, in your relationships, everything in between. So Proverbs 15:28 says, the heart of the righteous weighs its answers, but the mouth of the wicked gushes evil. When you're asked a question, and a certain question like, hey, where do you want to go eat? You don't need to really pause and think through. But anytime that there's something serious or weighty being discussed, pause and think about the words that you're going to say. If you get asked to do something, pause and think about, because sometimes the more that we're thrown into things, the more that we're questioned, the more that we run our mouth, Not a bad way, but we just say a lot of words, and then we make promises that we have no ability to keep because we didn't weigh our words carefully, and we ended up saying things or making guarantees that we didn't even mean to throw out there or put on the table. Weighing your words, even on social media, if you type something out to post, read it, reread it, think about how someone could misinterpret the tone, and just carefully put things out there, because once it's out there and people see it, they're not going to unsee it, and it's going to be in their brains forever, and their opinion of you may be changed based on what you inadvertently said by the words that you did not carefully weigh. So weigh your words carefully. Speak with a purpose, and think before you speak. And then finally, avoid unrealistic promises. Sometimes we make promises that we cannot keep. On little things like, I'll be at your Little League game. I promise I'll be there no matter what. Well, it's not hard for us to come up with scenarios that would keep you from getting to a game, a sporting event, picking them up, or whatever it is. Not because you have malice in your heart, but because something drastic happened that kept you from getting there. So weighing your words carefully is important in that context, and then also making sure that you make promises that you can actually keep, that you actually have control over. So in James chapter 4, the half-brother of Jesus, he kind of talks about this. And he says, listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why? You don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, just think about it. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. So, you have really little control over your life. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. And if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is a sin for them. So when you make promises that you cannot keep, what you're doing is just illustrating that you are clueless to the fact that you really have no control over your life. So if it's like, hey, are you going to be at the game tonight? I'm going to do my very best. That's a promise that you can keep, because you can do your very best. I was watching a movie not too long ago, and it showed a soldier going to war. And he promised his kids, I promise I'll be back. And I was thinking about, because I knew I was going to be preaching this, and I thought, man, what a difficult thing to say when you have very little control. It's a heavy, I was just sitting there in the heaviness of the movie scene that I was watching, thinking to myself, man, you have no control over that. In fact, I could say to my kids, I'll be home after work. I don't have control over that either. But I have more control than a person who's going on the other side of the world and fighting for freedom. So whenever you speak a little more slowly, and you weigh your words carefully, and you make realistic promises, now you're going to be inside the lines and get to the heart of what Jesus is trying to get us to do. That we are just people who, when we speak, we say what we mean, and we mean what we say. Now I want you to think about it, because you may hear this and think, I don't have a problem with this. This isn't, and this is a much lighter message than the last two. You're like, okay, so I won't make unrealistic, I won't say things I don't mean. I don't say things that I don't mean already. Really, throughout this week, process through and think about the words that come out of your mouth. And the way that you speak, and the words that you choose to use, and how quickly you speak. Try to be mindful of all of that. I can almost guarantee you, see, it's not an absolute certainty, because I was careful with my words there. I can almost guarantee you that you're going to find, if you allow the Holy Spirit to kind of nudge you, you're going to go, oh, okay, yeah, I do this, and I probably shouldn't do this anymore. So one of those things for me is, I tend to use hyperbole a lot. It's like at the beginning of the message, I said, they have to cut down 37,000 trees to come up with your mortgage documents. Now, no one thinks that they literally cut down 37,000, I don't think. Maybe you hear that stuff and you're like, maybe he just doesn't understand math. He just says things. Understand Jesus used hyperbole as well. When he said cut off your hand and gouge out your eye, he's exaggerating to make a point. So I exaggerate a lot to make a point. And so I might say, listen, you have done that 1,000 times already. Like, you got to make sure you do this instead. Well, I mean, am I literally counting? 999, 1,000. Okay, now I'm going to get on to him. He's done it 1,000 times. No, I'm being hyperbolic. But you got to be careful that whenever you're hyperbolic, there are certain situations where it's like he's clearly exaggerating to make a point. But there are sometimes, and particularly with my kids, where they may not completely understand that I'm exaggerating to make a point. And so I want to weigh my words carefully in all the different relationships that I have. And if I'm going to be hyperbolic or exaggerate to make a point, I'm going to make sure that it's obvious and clear to everybody that I'm exaggerating to make a point. So I want to be a little more careful. Weigh my words a little more carefully. Now, what that is for you, what it looks like for you, I'm not sure. But think about it, process through it, pray about it, and then as conversations are ongoing at work or at home or wherever, be thinking about the way that you're using your words and how it might get you into trouble and put you in jeopardy of applying this passage to your life. Because Jesus wants his people to be honest people filled with integrity, that not only do the right thing, but say the right thing, even in the most difficult situations and circumstances. So be challenged by this. Be convicted by this. And weigh your words carefully. Father, I pray.